Okay, I'm in the Gospel of John, chapter 12, Gospel of John, chapter 12, and I was in verse 33, 31, 32, 33 in the previous message, and so let me review again a little bit about what's happening here. What's going on is that Jesus he's having a conversation with the people, and they don't understand what he's saying, which is relatively normal considering the circumstances. Let me go back up to verse 27. I'm going to start in verse 27. Jesus said, "Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. But for this purpose I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name." So he's now speaking to God. He's surrounded by all these people. He's been trying to communicate with them. Now he just defaults and says, "Well, I'm just going to pray to the Lord." And they hear what he has to say. Then a voice came from heaven saying, "I have both glorified it and will glorify it again." Therefore the people who stood by and heard it said that it had thundered. Others said, "An angel has spoken to him." So they heard something in response to what he said, that there was some divine expression of some kind, and the people could tell that there was some kind of a response. And the thing that I was mentioning earlier in a previous message is that the people did not understand what the Lord said. That appears to be the case. So from what we have here, it appears that Jesus told John, or somehow John was informed at some point later on perhaps of what God said, that Jesus maybe told John this is what he said, and then John recorded it so we know what he has to say here. But the rest of the people should get a clue. They should get an understanding that Jesus does have communication with God, and God confirmed that this is the case. They did not understand what was going on, and so they should now have the opportunity to see that they do not have communication with God. All right, that it doesn't exist. Now, this is because of the miracle that God provided, not because Jesus expressed a prayer, that he said something out loud as if he is supposedly some kind of holy person. No, not even close. If God did not respond in a way that would be totally obvious that this was a divine expression, well, people who assert themselves that way of saying, "I am now praying to God and he's now going to confirm that I am one of his special people and you definitely are not." Well, if God doesn't give some kind of divine revelation concerning that, then you have just demonstrated that you are definitely not one of those special people who God knows. He probably doesn't know you at all. I mean, these are the kinds of things that go on in people's heads, all right? But I'm just mentioning this as part of what would have been potentially experienced. But this should have been an indicator to these people that they do not have the same kind of connection with God as Jesus has, because they can tell that there was a divine response, and they definitely do not understand or know what this divine response was. All right, that should give them an idea, it should give them a clue. So Jesus answered in verse 30, Jesus answered and said, "This voice did not come because of me, but for your sake. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all peoples to myself." This he said, signifying by what death he would die. All right, now in the previous message, I explained that by what death he would die, that he was about to be crucified. This would then be the means by which God would no longer hold the sins of the world against the world. This was the decision of God. This is how he would solve the sin problem between himself and humanity. That it would be an expression of forgiveness And through him manifesting in the flesh, living the life that he lived, and then dying in the way that he died, that was his way. It was a decision that this would be his way, that he would express to people that the sin issue has come to an end. All right? And now through doing this, he is able to draw all people to himself. All right? Now before he accomplished this, there was a covenant that was in place between God and the nation of Israel. And there was also an invitation, in effect, through that covenant, that if anybody would like to be in this relationship with God, as defined by the Old Covenant, then they could just simply submit themselves to the Old Covenant. They could live in accordance with the Mosaic Law. To do that effectively, they would have to reside within the nation of Israel. They would have to do that in order to do that effectively, or they're going to be traveling quite a bit, 3 times a year at least, in order to be at the divine location in Jerusalem at the appointed festivals. So there's a lot to that, but there was a divine invitation for everyone to be a part of the nation of Israel if they would meet those conditions. Because no one is able to fulfill the law as God defined it, this is not going to go anywhere. This kind of relationship would effectively go nowhere, and everyone would end up in a condition of being cursed by God, as defined by the law. So because of that, and because of a number of other things, there would be a need for another covenant, and this is the time when a new covenant is going to be established. Now, the new covenant is not about an agreement between God and the collective, the establishment of a new nation in the same way. This is a covenant between God and the individuals. And while there was a provision for anyone in the earth to join in with the old covenant, like I said, this isn't going to turn out very well. There is another invitation for people to join in through the new covenant, but this will be an individual relationship, not a collective relationship. So the people are going to surrender to the new covenant on an individual basis. He is able to draw everyone to himself, but the appeal or the attraction or what God is offering is different. Before, it was the blessings of the law. He will conquer your enemies in war. You will lend and not borrow. Your children will not be consumed by wild animals. The rain will come at the appointed time. You know, there are many blessings that God described in detail in the law that you can go through and you can study. And that was the offer. All right, the offer was, to give it a summary description, the offer had to do with the blessings of the flesh. That's what he was offering. Conditional upon your repentance and obedience. Of course, no one would be able to comply to the standard that was required, and so God would never bless anyone according to that criteria anyway. With what he is offering through the new covenant, is he is offering something different. He's not offering blessings in the flesh, even though on occasion he may very well bless people in the flesh. He is free to do that. There certainly is no obligation for that. And there will never be a time when a person will say, God owes me some blessing in the flesh. That's not going to happen. Instead, he's offering something else. Before he would draw people to himself through the blessings of the blessings according to their success in terms of their obedience. In this case, what he's offering is he's offering himself as a person. All right, it's a different offer. He's offering himself as a person in the sense that you can have an individual relational experience, an individual relationship with him as a person to person. And he initiates this by saying, look, I'm not going to hold your sins against you anymore. that is going to be the door, in a sense, that you can walk through to enter into something new, to enter into something different, that we're not going to deal with your sins anymore like this. This is going to define a new kind of relationship, and that's where we get started. We get started with that. So through the forgiveness that God has offered, he is inviting everyone in the world, to engage in a relationship with him, to connect with him, to surrender to the covenant that he has provided, that he has established. It is an invitation, and it starts with that. For a person to embrace that, well, that requires a lot, and a lot that most people are not willing to get to get through. For example, you're going to have to acknowledge that you have sin that needs to be forgiven. And it's really hard to find someone who's willing to acknowledge that. Most people just want to live in continual denial of reality. And that just separates most everyone from this opportunity. It's just the way it is. If a person is able to eventually concede that they have sinned that needs to be forgiven, and they're willing to accept and embrace the forgiveness that God has already provided, then there is a door that is open. They can walk through that, and there are new things that can be experienced. They can be loved by their God. They can be accepted by their God. There is an opportunity for mutual communication between people. There can be a new purpose defined in a person's life. There's a long ways to go when it comes to this topic. But this is what he means by drawing everyone to himself. He's going to draw people, or maybe even drag people in a sense, to himself through what he does, but it is a person's choice. Right? Everyone gets to choose if they will surrender to him and to what he is offering, or if they will reject what he is offering. Now, understand that there is a majority in the Christian world. Throughout the history of Christianity, there has been a majority of people who identify themselves as Christians who have rejected and still do not want to accept the idea that someone could choose to surrender to that. Most everyone wants to believe that God is the one who just simply declares and decides who is going to surrender, who is not going to surrender. I suppose for the most part because people want to feel like they're one of those special people. You're not one of those chosen of God, but I am. That kind of an attitude of pride that people find really appealing, very attractive. There's also a partial concern that God is giving up too much control, that he's giving up control, that he's giving up some of his power and some of his authority. There might be a mistake. Maybe someone's going to surrender to what God is offering that he doesn't really want to be around him, Well, that's not how this works out, okay? It just isn't how this works out, but these are some of the concerns that come up in people's minds that motivate them to believe that sort of thing, which I just don't believe in at all. But I think it's important to at least mention it, that this is something that a lot of people believe, even though I don't. And in my opinion, my personal opinion, the main reason why people believe in this is because they want to exclude themselves from everyone else by asserting that they are one of these special people. It has more to do with pride than truth. And then there are others who are perhaps a little bit more interested in truth, and that would be of the theological community, who are more concerned about God losing some of his sovereignty. All right, they're more concerned about that, and so they cannot allow anyone to have freedom of choice when it comes to whether they're going to accept or reject what God has to offer. It's my opinion that this goes all the way back to pagan Greek philosophy of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, because that is what they taught about if there is a God. I call this campfire theology, where you get You get a couple of guys around a campfire and they talk about the question of, all right, if there was a God, then could people just decide that they want to have a relationship with him, or does he have to make sure that only those people who he specifically wants to have a relationship with will have a relationship with him? Well, he does that by default by defining the criteria by which a person can be saved, such as, are you willing to acknowledge that you have sin that needs to be forgiven? Well, that discriminates from just about everybody right there, just that alone. Will you acknowledge that? Most people won't go there. They won't consider that. So he defines the criteria or the kind of person that he wants to have in his life, and then people can decide if they are going to be that kind of a person or not, or if there are other things that are more important to them than having a relationship with God. That's effectively what it comes down to. All right, now that's another topic. I'll pause there and go back to the verses at hand. You have Jesus who speaks to the Lord and replies, and the Lord replies, and Jesus said, this is for your benefit. I am taking the position that the benefit has to do with, can you see that you don't understand? Right? Here's an opportunity. Here's your benefit to see that you don't understand. Therefore, there must be something wrong with you. With you. And of course there is, which requires forgiveness. And so Jesus declares that that's what he's doing. He's going to effectively provide for the means of forgiveness so that their sins will not be held against them anymore. They will be drawn to God. God will draw them to himself, that they may surrender to the new covenant on the basis of forgiveness and the giving of the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, so that they can be made alive and made into a new creation, born again by the Spirit of God to become a child of God and now walk in the newness of life in a new relationship with the Lord. He's establishing the foundation for all of this. All right, now in verse 31, Jesus mentions, now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. And in the previous message, I spoke about this a little bit, where I described the fact that the role of the devil so far, pretty much, has been to condemn people. That's just part of what his role is. Let me take a moment and turn to the book of Job. Take me a moment to get there. It's been so long since I've been there. In Job, let's go to chapter 1. And let me start around verse 6 would be a good place to start. Yeah, verse 6. Now, this is Job chapter 1, verse 6. Now, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, from where do you come? So Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil? All right, so we have the description of an event where there are people who are recognized as the sons of God, who are going before the Lord at some appointed time, and they're going to have a conversation with him about what they're doing with their life. What are you doing? Where are you going? What are you seeing? What are you discovering? What are you creating? What are you producing? What are you participating in? Those kinds of questions. How are things going in your life? Tell me about it. Share with me what you are experiencing as a living person. How are you growing? How are you becoming different than how you were the last time you were here? All right? And he has a conversation with the devil, with Satan, and asks him, where you been? He says, well, I've been out here. And he's asked him, well, so what do you think about Job? Let's talk about Job for a little bit. In verse 9, so Satan answered the Lord and said, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. All right, and the Lord said to Satan, Behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not lay a hand on his person. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord, and then we can read about what happens after that, and how Job handled that, and how his friends handled that. All right, from this kind of a description, we can see that the devil, I like to refer to Satan as the devil, has had access to God, and that they have this relationship that's going on. All right, and the relationship has a lot to do with condemnation, that the devil is telling God, there are some people that are not as good as you think they are. That they have sin in their life, they have sin in their heart. Well, take this guy. You think he's perfect? All right, well, how about we make these adjustments in his life, and then we'll see. He'll curse you to your face. How about that? And then I'll be able to come back and report to you that, yeah, sure enough, Job has cursed you to your face. And so what do you think about that, huh? Let's talk about that. Let's see that he's not as impressive as you suggested he might be. Okay? So the way that the devil interacts with God is through condemning us. All right? That's a big part, certainly not all that there is, but that's a big part of the relationship that the devil has with God. This came to an end when Jesus died for the sins of the world. When Jesus died for the sins of the world, the devil and God don't really have anything to talk about anymore. All right, what's he going to say? Well, Job might curse you to his face, and the Lord can say, okay, yeah, so, well, I'm not going to hold that sin against him anymore. For he and I to have an improvement on our relationship, it's going to happen in a different way. It's not going to happen through the law, do not curse me to my face. It's going to happen differently. We're going to grow to know one another. We're going to participate in each other's lives. He is going to grow to love me to an extent where no matter what would happen to him, he would never curse me to my face. Not because of the law or because it's evil, but because of the relationship that we have with one another. That's going to start with the end of sin, the end of condemnation. It's going to be through forgiveness. So this is what happens, and this will change the relationship between God and the devil, all right? Again, when Jesus provided for the forgiveness of sins for the entire world, this changed the relationship between God and the devil. So what does the devil have to offer anymore? Why should God even speak to him anymore? Why should God allow the devil to have access to him anymore? What for? Right? It's over. The sin issue is over. There's nothing to talk about. So he is now cast out. Right? He's cast out from heaven in this context and for this purpose because of forgiveness. There's nothing to say anymore. There's nothing to talk about anymore. The law required obedience or death. All right, so Jesus died. There you go. The law has been fulfilled. Living by the knowledge of good and evil, it has been demonstrated. It doesn't work. It's now over. Now, through the new covenant, there will be a new way of life. All right, and this is something to discover and grow in. All right, I'm only speaking about its existence. I'm not taking the time to explain in detail how that kind of works out quite yet. I'm just getting us up to that point because, this is where Jesus is at in his ministry. He's getting us up to this point. So the devil will be cast out of the kingdom of heaven because there's no reason for him to be there anymore. All right? The law is fulfilled. The law is over. There is now a new relationship that is defined through the new covenant. It's a whole new thing. All right? So that's what happens. Let me go back to John chapter 12. All right? John chapter 12. This is verse 31. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. And I, if I am lifted up from myself, will draw all peoples to myself. This he said, signifying by what death he would die. All right, now, this sounds good, right? I mean, it should sound pretty good. And through what he accomplishes, he brings an end to the law. Unfortunately, with us, we tend to keep the law alive. All right? That's just what we do. Okay? It is a living struggle, and as far as I can tell, it will be an ongoing struggle until you are physically dead. It will just simply be reduced a little bit over time. Okay? In various ways. Now, for myself, we all have our own testimonies concerning our struggle with the law. For myself, this is how I got started. I got started with being in a circumstance where I realized I was definitely an awful person. It was everybody else knew it. It was just something that I finally acknowledged, and so I decided, you know what? Okay, fine. That's the way things are right now. But I'm going to change, and I'm going to become a good person. I'm going to become a better person. So a part of that was, all right, I'm going to now submit myself to the Mosaic law. I'm going to try that. I'm going to, and out of great sincerity, I went into it. I did. And in my pursuit of that, I decided that it would be a good idea for me to know the Messiah if I saw him. What is the criteria for the Messiah? What would the Messiah do? Why would he do it? What are the prophecies related to him? How would I know if he's fulfilled them or not? Wrestling with that question led me to the point of recognizing that Jesus is the only person in the history of humanity who will ever be able to fulfill what was prophesied and what would be required concerning the Messiah. No one else will possibly be able to do that, especially because there are a few of these prophecies that are dated, okay? And those dates came and went. We're not going back in time to try to do this again. So I made a decision based on the evidence that was presented before me that Jesus is the Messiah, that a new covenant has gone into effect. And it took a long time, years, for me to discover what that meant. Just what is the new covenant? And to let go of the law that I had submitted myself to, that I had surrendered to, that took some time. That was a real struggle. And in some ways, I still struggle with some of these issues. Sometimes, I have to admit, sometimes I make a decision to do the right thing. Even though I don't want to, I don't feel like it, I do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, which is an expression of living by the law. I know it's not the best way. It would be better if I did it because I really wanted to, but no, I don't feel like it. But I'll do it because it's right, because it's good, and I will not do that which is evil because it is evil, and that's not the best way to go. And this does kind of fit in the category of still living by the law. And there is an opportunity to be condemned when I fail. When, not if, when I sin, when I fail, when I do not comply with that which is good and I do that which is evil, there is an opportunity for condemnation, for me to feel as though I am separated from God, as if the relationship is gone, the relationship is lost. These are struggles that everyone gets to deal with in their own way, to their own degree, whatever magnitude that might be. That's a unique experience between everyone and their God, a continual struggle with the law. But let me go back to an exaggerated example. such that for myself, I decided I'm going to be the man. I'm going to be the guy. I'm going to be obedient to God. And here's the law. This is what I'm going to obey. It's clear. It's listed out. I'm going to do it. All right. Now, when a decision is made to do that, all right, and there are people all around you, all around us, who are committed to this way of life in various degrees. Some are to the extent that I just described, where they say, God said it through Moses, this is the way it is. Others will say, well, I'm going to, some of these are just a little bit too awkward, and so I'll take maybe half of the laws that are here. Or maybe 5% of them. Everyone will look at the laws and they'll say, okay, well, I'll go with the first 10 commandments. I'll just go with those. Or maybe 5 out of the 10, or 8 out of the 10, something like that. Whatever standard they live by, whatever list of laws they follow is still kind of the same thing. The same way of life of repent and obey. Repent and obey. And when you sin, sacrifice. But you don't see people setting their pets on fire. Instead, they apologize. They say the new sacrificial system is just tell God you're sorry. Ask for forgiveness. And that is now your sacrifice. All right? This is what most people believe. And this is a definition of the way of life that they live. Okay, that this to them is the relationship between them and God. There is an expectation on what is good and evil, what is right and wrong. Here's the laws, here's the commandments. You obey or you don't. Okay, and if you don't, well, you're at risk. You could very well be cursed. You might miss out on a blessing. All right, some punishment, some consequence of some kind. You're out of fellowship with God. Whatever it may be, there's going to be some penalty of some kind. All of this, the whole summary of this is what I will call living by the law. No matter how much law you've got in your life, you're still living by the law, living by the knowledge of good and evil. All right, but here's the deal. The relationship between God and the devil was once based on this, right? It was once based on this. Is a person obedient or not? Are they good or not so good? That was the relationship between God and the devil. And when God said it's over, the sin issue is over, he effectively said he died for the sins of the world without anybody asking him to do it, by the way. Right? He just did it. It's his way of saying, I'm done. I'm done. That's the end. I'm not dealing with this anymore. Devil, there is nothing more for us to talk about now. That's it. For me to have a relationship with somebody, it's going to be on different terms from now on. Different terms. Okay? There's a new covenant, and it goes into effect because I will remember their sins no more. All right, that's over. That's done. So there's no reason for the devil to be in God's life anymore. Get him out. Shut the door. Bar the gates. Close the gates. Lock them. Post some guards. If he comes around, just don't let him in. All right, where does he go? He goes to you. That's where he goes. He goes to us because we give him access. We invite the devil into our lives as soon as we decide that we are going to live according to what is good and evil, according to what is right and wrong, according to the commandments of God. We give the devil an invitation to come into our lives. We do. All right, and this is how it happens. You try it. You try to obey. You try to do what is good, what is right. when you fail, the devil will be there to remind you, to notify you, to make sure that you are properly informed that you have failed. Just like he would talk to God about Job and anybody else. No, God doesn't want to hear it, but you do, don't you? All right? You'll hear it. You'll listen to it. He'll bring it up and say, oh, yeah, see what you did? All right? Just pause on that for just a moment. Okay, pause on that for just a moment and think about the implications of what I just described. People invite the devil into their lives, even though God has said he's cast out from heaven. You'll invite him into your life through your pursuit of being a good person, through your pursuit of obedience to the law, through your pursuit of living by the commandments of God. All right, now look, you may be very well intentioned and you just don't understand that this is how it's going to work out, but this is how it will work out. And if you don't believe me, that's fine. I understand. I understand that this can be hard. This can be awkward. There's only one thing I would encourage you to do. All right, only one thing. Be committed. All right, be sincere. Don't just play with this knowledge of good and evil stuff. Don't just mess around with a few commandments. You do it all. You commit. You really devote your life to being good, all right, to living according to the commandments. Be sincere. Be who you say you think you should be. You do it. You do it. And it should only be a matter of time before you eventually come to the end and realize that what I'm saying is true, all right, because the devil is going to be all over you. All right, I'll come back to that in a little bit. Let's pause and think about, well, how does this work? How is it that the law, that which is, there's nothing wrong with it. It does define what is good. That's good, right? It's good. Why is it that it doesn't seem to work out so well? Well, Paul described in Romans, he described the subject of coveting. He said, I would not have known what it was to covet until the law said, don't covet. And it stirred up within me every covetous desire. All right? This is a simple example. Just a place to start. To give you an idea about how this works. The law says don't covet. All right? Look at what other people have and don't desire what they have. All right? And this is how it works. You look at what other people have, you look at their stuff and you say, oh, yeah, you have that thing. Oh, you have that thing. Boy, I don't really want to have that, but look at that. I really want that you have right there. Then you will have violated the law. Okay? That's how it works. It gives you something to think about. Don't do that. Don't do that. And you think, okay, I'll make sure I don't do that. 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 But that seems kind of appealing in this context. And it stirs up sin. Right? The law gives you things to think about doing that you likely wouldn't think about doing otherwise. And eventually, some of them, others, people just don't struggle with at all. I can give you a whole list of sins that I certainly have no struggle with at all. And then there's others that I do. All right? I'm sure for yourself, there are many that I struggle with you absolutely would not. And there are some that I don't struggle with that you do. There's plenty of these things to go around for everyone. All right? That's how it works. And there's something for everyone in the sense that there will be something that will eventually poke at you in such a way that you will eventually violate it. And that's what the law does. It says don't. And then eventually you do. Okay? You do just because eventually you discover something that seems appealing to you. Then there's the natural rebellion of humanity. It's just a normal rebellious thing. God says don't do it, and you say what? You say, oh, well, hey, look, don't be telling me what to do or what not to do. I am important. I I am my own God, in some ways. And just the fact that you tell me not to do it, that I'm just going to do it just to show you, just to show you I can, just to show you I will, just to make sure we understand each other, that you don't tell me what to do and what not to do. So I'll do it just out of rebellion, okay? Who cares if it's evil at that point? It doesn't matter if it's evil. It's because you said I shouldn't do it that I'll do it. That's evil enough. That's the evil, How dare you say don't do something? Or how dare you say do something? I will rebel just to show you, that kind of thing. It's the natural rebellion of humanity. That is the response to the law. Of course, not everyone, but there's enough people who struggle with this. All right, this is a classic childish response that you can observe. With some children, for example, they have their hand over the top of the hot stove, and you say, "Don't put your hand on that," and they smile and they say, "Oh yeah, well I'll put my hand on that just to show you, All right, and then they burn themselves. Okay, there are lots of examples like this where little girls and little boys, they respond that way. You just tell them, look, this is wrong. Don't do this or do this. And they will just do the exact opposite because that's what little boys and little girls do, But unfortunately, most little boys and little girls, they become older and they still act like a bunch of little boys and little girls in their 50s and 60s and 70s. The same struggle, right? Same struggle goes on. People don't normally get over that. But this is an issue, okay? So first you have just simply giving you things to think about doing that you never would have thought about doing to begin with, but now it's going to stir up within you some sinful desire. The law will do that in your life and stir up some more sin. There's the natural rebellion of humanity that people will struggle with, and so that stirs up some more sin. All right. Well, what happens when you do sin? What happens then? You do sin. Oh, now you're in real trouble, because now, if you believe that God holds your sin against you, now what are you going to do? He doesn't like you. He doesn't love you. He's going to turn his back to you. He's going to break off fellowship with you. He doesn't accept you. All right? Now what? All right? Well, don't worry. Anybody who tells you that will tell you, well, this is the procedure. This is the sacrificial system on how to get back in relationship with God. You go ahead and try it and see how you feel. It shouldn't take very long before you realize, no, that's not really establishing any connection between you and God either. But people have to wrestle with this and struggle with this. They feel good about doing something, but when they don't hear anything from the Lord, they should get an indicator, an indication. They should get a clue that God is not participating in that experience. He just doesn't have anything to do with it. All right? But the point is that there will be a separation of some kind between you and your God when you sin. All right? So why is this such a big deal, right? You would think that this would draw a person to God through repentance, right? That they feel bad, that they feel this separation, and they want things to be put back together. And so we need some sacramental or sacrificial kind of experience of some kind in order to restore this relationship with God through this ceremonial experience. All right, and people just find this appealing. All right, they find this appealing, and they hope it works. I don't think it does at all. I think it makes things worse. But I'm just going to mention that and not go into the details of that right now. That would be better for another time. At this time, I'm just going to go so far as to say that there is a belief that there is a separation between you and God. Now, when you believe this, all right, let me ask the question. Are you being loved by your God? No. Are you being accepted by your God? No. And if there's this out of fellowship routine going on, well, then you're obviously not having significant communication between you and God. You don't have any fellowship with each other. You're not relating to one another. How can he give you discernment, meaning, and understanding? How can he do that? No, he's got to wait until you follow the protocol. Find the altar through which you present your offering, your sacrifice. And people have various ceremonies and sacraments associated with that. But this belief that that's how it is, what does this do? This puts you in a situation where you're in trouble now because you have a need to be loved. You have a need to be accepted, right? You need this. You were created by God to need these things. And now, because of your sin, well, you're not going to get this from God, are you? No. So what are you going to do? Your sin is in the way. And you're obviously not getting over your sin, are you? Not to the satisfaction that is defined by the law. So where does this leave you? This leaves you in a state of emptiness, in a state of despair. All right? What are you going to do about the need that you have to be accepted? What are you going to do? God is not available because you got to get your flesh under control. Again, you have to get your flesh under control before God will accept you. So what are you going to do? In the meantime, you're going to need a break from all this religious pressure you're under, aren't you? You are. You're going to need that. So what are you going to do? You're going to go out into the world and you're going to indulge your flesh in sin so that you can get some sense of acceptance from somebody out there, some sense of love from somebody out there. All right? And so it will stir up sin because it separates you from God, and you've got no alternative but the world and the indulgence of the flesh. That's all you got. So the law stirs up sin when you fail. When you fail to obey, there is a belief that you are now separated from the love of God. So now you're condemned to go out and find love from somebody else, and that's going to increase sin. More sin. And then, eventually people just give up. All right? And they should give up, but they should turn to the new covenant. But instead of turning to the new covenant, normally because they just don't know what it is and they don't have access to anyone who does, they just end up just letting it go and just going back into the world and say, well, I tried it. And they may have, quite sincerely. But what they tried led them to the end, such as this. Giving them more things to think about doing, the natural rebellion that they will struggle with themselves. And then what happens when they fail to obey as God requires? How do they deal with the now increase in emptiness? Before they were just rejected by everybody else. Now they're rejected by everybody else and God. Now it's worse. Now there is greater desperation in finding acceptance and love from somebody out there. An increase in sin results. All right, so what happens when a person succeeds or they think that they have succeeded? What happens then? Right? I just explained what happens when a person fails. What happens if they are deceived into thinking that they have actually succeeded? Now, some of these things they can succeed at in a sense because, as I described earlier, there are just some sins that we just don't struggle with at all. You got yours, I got mine, that you can tempt me with every temptation imaginable, and I'm still going to say no. All right? That is just not for me, at all. And so my struggle with that isn't going to really exist. So that particular topic, whatever that is, I could say I have overcome, right? I could say that. I could say I obey. I have succeeded in overcoming that particular sin. And while I might impress other people, I shouldn't be that impressive because, well, I never really struggled with it to begin with. But even if I did a little bit, it's the idea of I have succeeded. All right? All right, so what happens then? If you have been deceived into thinking that you have succeeded, that you have overcome this sin, well, now you have what you need to have and build up religious pride. Okay? Now you've got religious pride. And this is going to manifest in all kinds of interesting little sins. All right? It's going to spread out. It's going to show itself in ways that you probably would never be able to recognize. It will start with you comparing yourself with other people by saying, well, that person, they're just not like me. I'm so much better than they are because they struggle with that sin and I don't. It starts with something like that usually. And that is religious pride. All right? And that form of religious pride and the ways that it surfaces and the ways that it evolves becomes manifestations of sin. Okay, so whether you fail or you succeed, you're still going to see an increase of sin in your life. Okay? And there's going to be an increase in condemnation that follows. So while God has cast out the devil from the kingdom of heaven, through your pursuit of the law, you invite him into your life. All right? That's what you do. You invite the devil into your life through your continued pursuit of this. And this is going to be a continual struggle that we all deal with throughout the rest of our lives. It's just part of who we are and how we live. All right? Now, let me proceed a little bit more. I spent a lot more time talking about this than I thought I would. Let me just end with a little bit of a few more details. Let me give a little bit more and not just leave you hanging on just that. Okay, what eventually happens is that you discover that there are 3 different ways of living. Okay, one way of living is described as living by the indulgence of the flesh. And this is someone who just goes out there living for to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. And most people are living in this way. That's one way of life, and it definitely is not what we want to see. It's not the kind of life that we want to have. The next way of life is to live by the restraint of the flesh. And that has to do with living our lives by the law, the restraint of the flesh. The third way of life is to live in accordance with the new covenant, and that's to live by the inheritance that we have received in Christ Jesus as a result of his death. And that's just an introductory description. What that means and what that entails, that's a big topic. There's just a lot to say about that, just in order to get a person started with that. But this is a life in accordance with the Spirit, with the spiritual connection and the spiritual relationship that you have with your God because his Spirit dwells within you. So most people are struggling with the first 2 of living their lives by either the indulgence of the flesh or the restraint of the flesh. And what you have is you have the people living by the indulgence of the flesh, who we generally describe as the people who are living in the world, who are not religious. And then you have the people who are living by, those are the indulgence of the flesh. Then you have the people living by the restraint of the flesh, who we would call the religious people. Okay? The religious people are those who live by a standard of law of some kind, whatever it may be. The word religious comes from the root of religio, which means by definition a system of bondage, all right? And the system of bondage is defined by their knowledge of good and evil, by the standard by which they live. So you have the non-religious who are living by the indulgence of the flesh, and then you have the religious who are living by the restraint of the flesh. And my point is that both ways of life are still living by the flesh. Okay? Both ways of life still have to do with living by the flesh. Our God has presented something else, and that is that we may live by the Spirit. And that's what where the new covenant is at, and what it refers to is the living by the Spirit. Okay, so with that, let me proceed a little bit more into verse 35. in verse 35, then Jesus said to them, a little while longer, the light is with you. Oh, let me go back up to verse 34. Verse 34, the people answered him, we have heard from the law that the Christ remains forever. And how can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man? All right, so in the previous message, I explained that what they were saying was that they wanted the law to be in their life. They wanted the Messiah to establish and to maintain this certain kind of relationship forever. And because of what Jesus is saying and because of what Jesus is doing, they're being confronted with the fact that it's just not going to be that way. All right? The new covenant that's going to go into effect, yes, he will be the Messiah. He will be with us forever. There will be an eternal kingdom, but it's going to be one that is based in the spiritual dimension. I explained this in the previous message. The spiritual dimension, it's not about indulgence or restraint of the flesh. And that's where they were still stuck. It's not about indulgence or restraint of the flesh. It's about another way of life entirely, and they just simply didn't see it. They didn't understand it. All right, but this is where the Messiah will fulfill this. This is how his kingdom will endure forever. It will endure forever because it will be outside of the flesh. You know, the flesh is going to end. This planet is going to stop spinning one day. It is going to end. It is not going to last forever. It is the spiritual realm, the spiritual dimension. It's another place, another life existence entirely that is continual forever. And that is what we are being invited to enter into, a little bit at a time. Okay, so what does Jesus say? He says, then Jesus said to them, a little while longer, the light is with you. Walk while you have the light, lest darkness overtake you. He who walks in the darkness does not know where he is going. While you have the light, believe in the light, that you may become sons of light. These things Jesus spoke and departed and was hidden from them. All right, and in the previous message, I explained that in him saying this, he was saying, that's right, you don't get it. Okay? That he presented the truth to them, and they said, no, we think this. And he says, in effect, no, you just don't get it. You got some time to get in touch with this. All right, I'm here. We can continue to talk. But he left, and he was hidden from them. He gave them enough, and he walked away. Another way to say this, okay, another way to look at this that I'll present in this message is he's telling them, yes, that's right. You're in the dark. Okay? You are. The light is present with you right now. Here's your invitation. Here's your opportunity. But your refusal to believe is going to leave you in the dark. And pretty soon, when Jesus leaves, they're definitely going to be in the dark. Okay? To use that expression. These things Jesus spoke and departed and was hidden from them. Verse 37. But although he had done so many signs before them, they did not believe in him, that the word of Isaiah the prophet might be fulfilled, which he spoke, Lord, who has believed our report? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? Therefore they could not believe, because Isaiah said again, He has blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, lest they should see with their eyes, lest they should understand with their hearts, and turn so that I should heal them. These things Isaiah said when he saw his glory and spoke of him. All right. Now, this does not mean that God blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts against their will. It doesn't mean that, although I understand that most people want to think that that's what it means. I just don't see it, okay? That against their will, whether they wanted to or not, he is going to blind their eyes and harden their hearts. It wasn't about that. They said, "This is what we want." And Jesus said, "No, I'm not going to be a part of that. We're not going to do that." All right? So he blinded their eyes because what he offered to them was not what they wanted. So they turned away from it. They ignored it. He blinded their eyes. He showed them something. This is what I have to offer. And because it was not what they wanted, they were blinded by what he had to offer. He offered something for their heart, and it wasn't what they wanted for their heart. And so through what he was offering, they turned away. And he hardened their hearts because he offered them something they didn't want. So if he didn't offer anything, then their hearts would not be hardened because they would not be reacting. They would not be responding. Remember what I said earlier about this is one of the ways that people will have sin stirred up in their hearts and their lives. Don't be telling me what to do. Don't be telling me what not to do. It's the same kind of thing. When God presents himself, they say no. So he hardens their hearts because they refuse what he is offering. It's not because he looks at them and he says, no, you're not allowed to see. No, you're not allowed to understand. You're not allowed to accept. No, your heart can't embrace this. I'm not going to let that happen. That's not what he's doing. He offers something to them. He shows them something. He offers them something, and they refuse. So his presenting that caused a hardening, caused a blindness because of their refusal. All right, that's how that works. That's what that means. Isaiah foresaw this. And I could suggest that you don't need divine revelation to see that this is how people will react. Okay? I could suggest that. But we definitely do have divine revelation to see that this is how people will react. And that's what Isaiah saw. He reported it. And John has recorded here that this particular conversation was an example of this. Again, in verse 41, these things Isaiah said when he saw his glory and spoke of him. All right, Isaiah was able to see this revelation. Okay, for those of you who are using this for some small groups, I got a question for you to wrestle with a little bit. How do you relate to the three different ways of life of indulgence of the flesh, restraint of the flesh, and living by the Spirit? You're probably familiar with the first two of indulgence of the flesh or restraint of the flesh. In what ways can you relate to this? To these two different ways of life? And how can you relate to, or what is your understanding? And if you don't have any, it's fine. At least that's a place to start, right? Of what it means to live by the Spirit, of this third way of life of living by the inheritance. I think this is a good time to begin some conversations about this, as I've just given you a description of the four different ways that a person can experience a stirring up of sin in their lives through the knowledge of good and evil, and through trying to live by the knowledge of good and evil, and through trying to live by the law. I've given you the four different ways that sin is stirred up in a person's life, and the three different ways that a person can have a focus in terms of how they might live their lives. So in considering those, it's a lot to think about. How can you relate to these things? Okay, thank you.